The Complexo do Alemão, located in the northern zone of Rio de Janeiro, is a group of 13 communities that developed throughout the 20th century. Originally, the area consisted of large farms, including one owned by a German merchant, which inspired the name of the location. With urban growth and the influx of workers migrating from rural areas in search of opportunities in the city, the Complexo do Alemão experienced rapid settlement. In the 1950s and 1960s, the region began to establish itself as a large community, housing thousands of low-income families. However, the lack of urban planning and public policies contributed to the precarious living conditions in the area, including deficiencies in infrastructure, education, and healthcare. In the 1980s and 1990s, the Complexo do Alemão became one of the main hubs for drug trafficking in Rio de Janeiro. The absence of government presence, combined with precarious socio-economic conditions, created an opening for criminal factions to fill the power vacuum. Groups like the Comando Vermelho established territorial control, using the area as a drug distribution hub and operational base. The violence associated with drug trafficking, including clashes between rival factions and confrontations with police forces, became a constant in the lives of residents. At the same time, the traffickers also imposed a form of social control, enforcing rules and penalties within the community. This environment created a complex dynamic of fear, survival, and resilience among the local population. The Complexo do Alemão is a reflection of a larger issue, the urban violence that has plagued Rio de Janeiro for decades. The city's uncontrolled growth, extreme social inequality, and corruption in public institutions have all contributed to the rise in criminal activity. Rio has become one of the primary battlegrounds for armed conflicts between drug traffickers and security forces, placing residents of communities like the Complexo do Alemão at the center of the crossfire. Beyond the physical and emotional toll, the violence has deeply affected opportunities for income generation, education, and social mobility. This complex and challenging reality has shaped the history and daily life of the Complexo do Alemão, setting the stage for significant events such as the 2010 invasion. The invasion of the Complexo do Alemão in 2010 was driven by the alarming rise in crime in Rio de Janeiro, particularly in communities controlled by drug traffickers. Armed clashes between rival factions and the increasing boldness of traffickers, who began targeting civilians and police, created intense public pressure for concrete security measures. The situation worsened with the approach of major international events, such as the 2014 World Cup and the 2016 Olympics, heightening the need to project an image of control and stability. The days leading up to the operation were marked by a series of attacks attributed to drug traffickers. Ambushes, the burning of buses and vehicles, armed assaults on police, and gunfire in urban areas created an atmosphere of chaos in Rio de Janeiro. These violent acts highlighted the parallel power wielded by criminals and exposed the vulnerability of public institutions. In response, the state government, in collaboration with the federal government, decided to launch a massive operation to regain control of the Complexo do Alemão. The operation involved unprecedented strategic planning in the history of Rio de Janeiro. Over 2,600 personnel, including members of the military police, civil police, and armed forces, were mobilized. The use of Navy armored vehicles, helicopters, and modern equipment was crucial for the operation's logistics. The media played a central role during this period, closely monitoring and broadcasting live coverage of the security forces' movements and the traffickers' reactions. This constant surveillance not only heightened the pressure on the criminals, but also reinforced the public perception that significant action was being taken. The operation involved a large contingent of security forces, including the military police, civil police, the Brazilian army, and other auxiliary forces. The armed forces played a key logistical role, providing armored vehicles and heavy equipment, while local police led the ground incursion into the communities. The integration between security agencies was crucial to the success of the operation. The operation involved a large contingent of security forces, including the military police, civil police, the Brazilian army, and other auxiliary forces. The armed forces played a key logistical role, providing armored vehicles and heavy equipment, while local police led the ground incursion into the communities. The integration between security agencies was crucial to the success of the operation. The operation's strategy combined ground and aerial actions to encircle and neutralize the traffickers. Navy armored vehicles were used to break through barricades set up by the criminals, while helicopters supported ground troops, providing a strategic view of the terrain. the use of non-lethal weapons, and a focus on safeguarding the residents' well-being were also part of the tactical plan, although the operation saw numerous armed confrontations. The invasion of the Complexo do Alemão was marked by moments of high tension and striking visuals. One of the most symbolic episodes was the mass escape of traffickers through alleys and narrow pathways, broadcast live on television networks. Armed confrontations were intense in the early days, but the progressive occupation of the hills by security forces allowed the troops to advance and reclaim territories previously controlled by traffickers. The immediate results of the operation included the recovery of weapons, drugs, and money. Additionally, the removal of barricades and the establishment of control bases were crucial steps in consolidating the state's presence in the region. The invasion brought an atmosphere of fear and insecurity to the residents of the Complexo do Alemão. Reports of rights violations such as home invasions without judicial warrants and aggressive approaches were common during the operation. Many families remained confined to their homes for days, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. During the operation, public services were severely disrupted. Schools, health clinics, and local businesses remained closed, limiting access to essential goods and services. Mobility within the community was also hindered by barricades and the constant presence of security forces. One of the most iconic moments of the invasion was the mass escape of traffickers, who tried to flee through the alleys of the Complexo do Alemão while being monitored and pursued by security forces. These images, broadcast live on television, captured the nation's attention and symbolized the scale of the confrontation. The operation led to the arrest of dozens of traffickers and suspects. Additionally, a significant amount of weapons, ammunition, drugs, and money was confiscated. These outcomes were widely publicized as one of the key successes of the intervention. Despite efforts to minimize collateral damage, there were reports of deaths and injuries during the operation, including both civilians and police officers. The excessive use of force by authorities came under criticism, sparking debates about human rights and the security protocols used in operations of this scale. After the invasion, the Complexo do Alemão was occupied by security forces, and the implementation of the Pacifying Police Units, UPPs, began. This initiative aimed to maintain the state's presence in the region and promote the rebuilding of the social fabric. However, it faced significant challenges in establishing itself as a long-term solution. The operation in the Complexo do Alemão received extensive media coverage, with live broadcasts capturing iconic moments such as the traffickers' escape and the advance of security forces. These images were widely disseminated and had a strong impact on public opinion. The prevailing media narrative portrayed the operation as a demonstration of the state's strength and effectiveness, but it also raised questions about the human and social costs of the intervention. Public and expert opinions were polarized. While some praised the state's reclamation of territorial control and the immediate impact on reducing crime, others criticized the militarization of communities and the violation of human rights. Reports of abuses by security forces, such as home invasions and assaults, were widely highlighted by NGOs and civil society, sparking debates about balancing security and citizenship. The operation also drew the attention of international human rights organizations, such as Amnesty International, which expressed concerns about potential rights violations and the impact on the local population. Additionally, the operation was observed as an example of how major urban centers attempt to address complex issues related to organized crime, offering both lessons and warnings for other regions around the world. The invasion of the Complexo do Alemão led to a significant short-term reduction in crime, particularly through the seizure of weapons and the disruption of criminal factions that controlled the area. However, over time, the gradual return of drug trafficking and the reorganization of criminal groups highlighted the operation's limitations in establishing lasting peace. Although the occupation brought some localized improvements in infrastructure, such as the implementation of public services and increased police presence, residents continued to face challenges related to poverty, unemployment, and lack of access to opportunities. Many of these structural issues remain unresolved, perpetuating a cycle of social exclusion.